What's going on, guys? Welcome back to my channel. Today I've got real stories that were submitted by viewers, and let me tell you, these ones kept me up at night after reading them. Before we jump in, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. It really helps the channel grow and brings us closer to our next milestone. Alright, let's get into it. This first story comes from Dexter, who was working as a security guard at a hospital in Ohio back in 2019. Now, Dexter had been doing security work for about 6 years, mostly at office buildings and shopping centers, so when he got the job at Riverside General Hospital, he thought it would be just another easy gig. Boy, was he wrong. Riverside General was one of those older hospitals, built sometime in the 1960s. The kind of place with long, fluorescent-lit hallways that seemed to stretch on forever, and rooms that hadn't been updated since the Carter administration. Dexter's shift ran from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., which meant he had the place mostly to himself except for a skeleton crew of nurses on the overnight ward. The hospital layout was pretty straightforward, 5 floors total. Ground floor had the emergency room, which stayed busy even at night. Second and third floors were patient rooms. Fourth floor was administrative offices that were completely empty after 6 p.m. And the fifth floor, well, that's where things get interesting. The fifth floor used to be the psychiatric ward back in the 80s and 90s, but it had been shut down for over a decade due to budget cuts. The hospital kept saying they were going to renovate it into more patient rooms, but that never happened. So it just sat there, empty, with all the old equipment still inside hospital beds with leather restraints, old medical charts scattered on desks, medication cabinets with their locks broken off. Dexter's supervisor, a guy named Raymond who'd been there since the place opened, gave him the tour on his first night. Raymond was maybe in his late 50s, the kind of guy who'd seen everything and wasn't impressed by much anymore. When they got to the 5th floor, Raymond unlocked the door with this massive ring of keys he carried. "Look," Raymond said, "I'm gonna be straight with you. Nobody goes up here unless there's an emergency. And I mean a real emergency like a fire or something. The nurses won't even come up here to clean. We pay a service to come in once a month during the day." Dexter asked why, and Raymond just gave him this look. "You'll figure it out," he said. "Just trust me on this one." For the first few weeks, everything was normal. Dexter would do his rounds, check all the doors, make sure the emergency exits weren't blocked, walk through each floor with his flashlight. The hospital at night was actually kind of peaceful. Sure, there were the usual sounds, machines beeping, the occasional code blue announcement, footsteps from the nursing staff. But it wasn't scary or anything. Then one night in his 3rd week, Dexter was doing his 2 a.m. rounds when he heard something from upstairs. Sounded like wheels, like a gurney or wheelchair being rolled across the floor. Which was weird, because the 5th floor was supposed to be completely empty. He stood at the bottom of the stairwell, listening. The sound stopped. Dexter figured maybe it was just the building settling or pipes making noise. Old buildings do that. So he continued his rounds and didn't think much more about it. But the next night, same time, 2 a.m., he heard it again. This time it was definitely wheels, and it was definitely coming from the 5th floor. There was also what sounded like humming, like someone humming a tune while they worked. Now, Dexter wasn't the type to let his imagination run wild, but this was bothering him. He radioed down to the front desk where Nurse Patricia usually stationed herself during the night shift. "Hey Patricia, is there supposed to be anyone on 5 tonight?" "5? No, honey, nobody goes up there. Why, you hearing things?" Dexter told her about the sounds, and Patricia got quiet for a moment. "Listen," she said, "I've been working here for 12 years. My advice? Don't go looking for trouble on 5. Just do your job and ignore whatever you think you're hearing." But Dexter couldn't ignore it. The sounds kept happening night after night, always around 2 a.m. Sometimes it was wheels rolling. Sometimes it was footsteps. Once, he could have sworn he heard voices, like 2 people having a conversation, but he couldn't make out any words. After 2 weeks of this, Dexter decided he had to check it out. He grabbed his flashlight and the keys Raymond had given him and headed up to the 5th floor. The door was already unlocked. That stopped him cold, because he knew for a fact that Raymond locked that door every single day before leaving. Dexter had watched him do it. But here it was, standing slightly open, with just a sliver of darkness visible beyond. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. The fifth floor was exactly like Raymond had described, a time capsule from the 1990s. There were about 30 patient rooms lining a central hallway, with a nurse's station in the middle. Everything was covered in a thin layer of dust, and the air had that stale, medicinal smell that old hospitals never quite lose. Dexter walked slowly down the hallway, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Most of the patient rooms were empty except for old bed frames and broken equipment. But as he got closer to the end of the hall, he started to notice something odd. Some of the rooms looked lived in. In room 517, there was a hospital bed that had been made up with clean sheets. Not old, dusty sheets, fresh ones, like someone had just changed them. There was a water pitcher on the bedside table that was half full, and a clipboard with what looked like a current medical chart. Room 519 had medical equipment that was plugged in and running. Dexter could hear the quiet hum of machines, and there were digital readouts showing what looked like vital signs. But there was no patient in the bed. This was getting seriously weird, and Dexter was starting to think he should head back downstairs and call Raymond. But then he heard something that made his blood run cold. Crying. Someone was crying very quietly from one of the rooms at the far end of the hall. Dexter approached carefully, his flashlight pointed ahead of him. The crying was coming from room 523, and the door was closed. He could see light coming from underneath. Not electric light, but something softer, like candlelight. He reached for the door handle, and that's when he heard a voice. "Please don't hurt me anymore." It was a woman's voice, very quiet and shaky, like she was talking to someone else in the room. Dexter pressed his ear to the door. He could hear movement inside, like someone walking around. Then the woman's voice again. "I said I was sorry. I said I wouldn't tell anyone." There was a long pause, then what sounded like medical equipment being moved around. "No, not the restraints again. Please." That's when Dexter realized he needed to call the police. Someone was being held against their will in that room. He quietly backed away from the door and pulled out his cell phone. But there was no signal on the fifth floor. He'd have to go back downstairs. But as he turned to leave, the door to room 523 opened. There was nobody there. The room was completely empty. No patient, no equipment, no candles. Just an old hospital bed and some broken furniture covered in dust. But Dexter had heard voices just seconds before. He'd seen light under the door. He stood there for maybe 30 seconds, trying to process what had just happened, when he heard footsteps behind him. Slow, deliberate footsteps like someone walking in heavy shoes. Dexter spun around, his flashlight sweeping across the hallway. There was nobody there, but the footsteps continued, getting closer. And now he could hear something else, the sound of keys jingling, like someone carrying a large ring of keys. That's when he ran. Dexter sprinted down that hallway faster than he'd ever run in his life, crashed through the stairwell door, and didn't stop until he reached the ground floor. Patricia took one look at him and knew something was wrong. "You went up there, didn't you?" she said. Dexter told her everything he'd experienced, and Patricia just nodded like she'd heard it all before. "Room 523, she said. That was Vanessa Cromwell's room. She was a patient here back in 1994, admitted for severe depression after her husband left her. But something went wrong with her treatment. The story I heard was that one of the night shift nurses, let's just say he wasn't as professional as he should have been with some of the female patients." Patricia explained that Vanessa had tried to report what was happening to her, but nobody believed her. She was a psychiatric patient, after all. Who was going to take her word over a respected nurse? "She died in that room," Patricia continued. "Official cause was suicide, but there were questions. The nurse, his name was Theodore Kessler, left town right after it happened. Never heard from again." Dexter asked if other security guards had experienced similar things, and Patricia confirmed that pretty much everyone who worked the night shift had stories about the fifth floor. That's why Raymond had told him to stay away. "The thing is," Patricia said, "it's not just random spooky stuff. It's always the same sounds of medical equipment, voices asking for help. Room 523. It's like she's still up there, still trying to get someone to listen to her. Dexter finished out his shift that night, but he put in his 2 weeks' notice the next day. He told me he couldn't handle knowing that Vanessa was still trapped up there, still experiencing whatever had happened to her in 1994, over and over again. Before he left Riverside General, Dexter did some research into Theodore Kessler. He found out that Kessler had moved to Florida after leaving Ohio and had been arrested there in 1998 for assault charges involving a female coworker. The charges were dropped when the victim refused to testify, but it seemed like Vanessa hadn't been his only victim. Dexter's replacement lasted exactly 3 nights before quitting. The hospital eventually hired a security company that specifically told their guards not to go to the 5th floor under any circumstances. As far as Dexter knows, that floor is still empty, and Vanessa is still waiting for someone to believe her story. If you're enjoying these stories so far, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow and lets me know you want more content like this. This next story was sent to me by Lillian, who was 16 years old when this happened to her back in 2018. Lillian lived in a small town in Pennsylvania, one of those places where everybody knows everybody, and nothing really exciting ever happens, which is probably why what happened to her was so shocking. Lillian had been babysitting since she was 14, mostly for families in her neighborhood. She was responsible, trustworthy, and good with kids, so she had pretty steady work on weekends. The money helped her save up for a car, and she genuinely enjoyed spending time with the families she worked for. One Friday evening in October, Lillian got a call from a woman named Elena Hartwell. Elena explained that she and her husband had just moved to town, and they needed a babysitter for their 8-year-old daughter, Juniper, that Saturday night. Elena had gotten Lillian's number from one of the neighbors, and she was wondering if Lillian would be available. The pay was good $30 for 4 hours, and Lillian didn't have any other plans, so she agreed. Elena gave her the address, 847 Maple Grove Lane, which was in one of the newer subdivisions on the outskirts of town. Saturday evening, Lillian's mom dropped her off at the Hartwell house around 6 p.m. It was a nice 2-story colonial, probably built within the last 5 years. Very clean, very suburban, with a perfectly manicured lawn and those kinds of decorative shutters that don't actually close. Elena Hartwell answered the door, and Lillian's first impression was that she seemed nervous. Elena was probably in her mid-30s, well-dressed, but she kept fidgeting with her jewelry and looking over her shoulder while she talked. "Thank you so much for coming," Elena said, ushering Lillian inside. "I know this is short notice, but something came up with my husband's work." The house was immaculate inside, the kind of place where everything has its spot and nothing is out of place. Lillian could smell something cooking in the kitchen, maybe roast chicken, and there was classical music playing softly from speakers she couldn't see. Elena introduced her to Juniper, who was sitting at the kitchen table coloring in a workbook. Juniper was a cute kid, blonde hair and braids, wearing a pink dress that looked like it had never been wrinkled. But she was also really quiet. When Lillian said hello, Juniper just looked up, gave a small wave and went back to her coloring. "She's a little shy around new people," Elena explained, "but she's very well behaved. She's already had dinner, so all you need to do is maybe watch a movie with her and make sure she's in bed by 8:30. Elena's husband, Damien, came downstairs while Elena was explaining the house rules. He was tall, maybe early 40s, wearing a suit like he was headed to something formal. But like Elena, he seemed tense about something. "We should be back by 10, Damien said, checking his watch. "Possibly 10:30 at the latest. Our cell phone numbers are on the refrigerator if you need anything." Elena knelt down next to Juniper and gave her a hug. "Be good for Lillian. Okay, sweetie? We'll be back soon." Juniper nodded but didn't say anything. She just continued coloring, very focused on staying inside the lines. After the Hartwells left, Lillian tried to make conversation with Juniper. She asked about school, about her favorite movies, about the drawings she was working on. Juniper would answer, but always very briefly, and always in a quiet voice that was barely above a whisper. "Do you want to watch something on TV?" Lillian asked. "I'm not allowed to watch TV after 7, Juniper said, not looking up from her coloring book. "Oh, well, what do you usually do in the evenings? Color or read?" Mama says reading makes you smart. Lillian found this a little odd. What 8-year-old isn't allowed to watch TV after 7? But every family has their rules. She sat down at the table with Juniper and tried to engage her in conversation about the pictures she was coloring. Around 7:30, Lillian suggested they get ready for bed, since Juniper's bedtime was 8:30. Juniper immediately put her crayons away and headed upstairs without being asked twice. Again, unusual for an 8-year-old, but Lillian figured some kids are just naturally obedient. Juniper's bedroom was on the 2nd floor, at the end of a long hallway. It was decorated exactly like you'd expect: pink walls, stuffed animals, a canopy bed with white curtains. But something about the room felt off to Lillian, though she couldn't put her finger on what it was. Juniper got into her pajamas and brushed her teeth without any prompting. She climbed into bed and pulled the covers up to her chin. "Can you read me a story?" Juniper asked. "Of course," Lillian said. There was a bookshelf next to the bed with dozens of children's books. Lillian picked one at random, something about a rabbit who goes on adventures. But as she started reading, she noticed that Juniper wasn't looking at the book. She was staring at the bedroom door with this expression that Lillian couldn't quite read. It wasn't fear exactly, but it was definitely some kind of concern. "Is everything okay?" Lillian asked. Juniper nodded quickly. "Keep reading, please." Lillian continued with the story, but she was now paying attention to Juniper's behavior. The little girl seemed to be listening for something. Her head would tilt slightly every few minutes, like she was trying to hear sounds from somewhere else in the house. When Lillian finished the story, she started to get up to turn off the light, but Juniper grabbed her arm. "Can you stay until I fall asleep?" Juniper asked. "Sure, honey. Is there something wrong?" Juniper shook her head, but she didn't let go of Lillian's arm. "Sometimes there are noises at night. Mama says it's just the house settling, but I don't like them." Lillian sat back down in the chair next to Juniper's bed. "What kind of noises?" "Like someone walking around downstairs, and sometimes the doors open and close by themselves." This made Lillian a little uncomfortable, but she figured Juniper was just nervous about being with a new babysitter. Old houses make weird sounds, and kids have active imaginations. "I'll stay right here until you fall asleep," Lillian promised. Juniper seemed to relax a little bit, and within about 15 minutes, her breathing became slow and steady. Lillian waited a few more minutes to make sure she was really asleep, then quietly left the room, leaving the door slightly open in case Juniper called for her. Downstairs, Lillian settled on the couch in the living room with her phone. She texted a few friends and scrolled through social media, just killing time until the Hartwells got home. The house was quiet except for the usual sounds: the refrigerator humming, the heating system cycling on and off, a clock ticking somewhere. Around 9:15, Lillian heard what sounded like a door closing somewhere in the house. She looked up from her phone and listened, but everything was quiet again. Probably just what Juniper had mentioned, old house noises. But then she heard footsteps. They were coming from upstairs, slow and deliberate, like someone trying to be quiet. Lillian's first thought was that Juniper had gotten up to use the bathroom or get a drink of water. But the footsteps seemed too heavy to be a child's. Lillian got up from the couch and went to the bottom of the stairs. "Juniper? Is that you, honey?" No response. The footsteps stopped. Lillian climbed the stairs quietly, not wanting to wake Juniper if she had managed to get back to sleep. When she reached the top, she could see that Juniper's bedroom door was still open exactly as she'd left it. She peeked inside. Juniper was in bed, apparently sound asleep. But now Lillian noticed something that made her stomach drop. Juniper's bedroom was at the end of the hallway, but there were 3 other doors along the hallway that she hadn't really paid attention to before. 2 of them were closed, but one, the door to what looked like a master bedroom, was wide open. Lillian was pretty sure that door had been closed when she'd come upstairs with Juniper earlier. She approached the open door carefully and looked inside. It was definitely the master bedroom: king-size bed, matching dresser and nightstands, a large window overlooking the backyard. Nothing seemed out of place, but Lillian had this overwhelming feeling that someone had been in there recently. She was about to head back downstairs when she heard Juniper's voice, very quiet, from her bedroom. "Lillian, Lillian went back to Juniper's room. The little girl was sitting up in bed, looking toward the doorway. "I heard someone walking around," Juniper whispered. "It's okay, sweetie. I was just checking on something. Lie back down." But Juniper shook her head. "Not you. Someone else." That's when Lillian heard it again, footsteps. But this time they were coming from downstairs. Slow, measured steps like someone walking through the living room. Lillian's heart started racing. The Hartwells weren't supposed to be back until 10 at the earliest, and it was only 9:30. Plus, wouldn't they have called out when they came in? "Stay right here," Lillian whispered to Juniper. "Don't leave your room." Lillian crept to the top of the stairs and listened. The footsteps had stopped, but now she could hear what sounded like cabinets opening and closing in the kitchen, like someone was looking for something. She pulled out her phone and called Elena Hartwell's number. It went straight to voicemail. She tried Damien's number, same thing. The sounds from the kitchen continued. Now it sounded like someone was going through drawers, moving things around. Lillian was pretty sure someone had broken into the house, and she was trapped upstairs with an 8-year-old. She called 911. 911, "What's your emergency?" "I'm babysitting at 847 Maple Grove Lane, and I think someone broke into the house. I'm upstairs with the child, and there's someone moving around downstairs." The dispatcher kept her on the line and said police were on their way. Lillian stayed at the top of the stairs, listening to the sounds below. Whoever was down there was definitely searching for something. She could hear them moving from room to room, opening doors, moving furniture. After what felt like forever, but was probably only 5 minutes, Lillian saw flashing lights outside and heard car doors slamming. The sounds downstairs stopped immediately. 2 police officers came to the front door, and Lillian went down to let them in, bringing Juniper with her. The officers searched the entire house but found no one. All the doors and windows were locked from the inside. Nothing appeared to be missing or disturbed. One of the officers, a woman named Detective Morrison, asked Lillian to describe exactly what she'd heard. When Lillian mentioned the footsteps and the sounds of someone going through cabinets, Detective Morrison and her partner exchanged a look. "Has anyone mentioned anything unusual about this house?" Detective Morrison asked. Lillian said no, but Juniper, who had been quiet up until this point, suddenly spoke up. "The man comes at night sometimes," she said in that same whisper-quiet voice. Detective Morrison knelt down to Juniper's level. "What man, sweetheart?" "The man who used to live here. Mama said he went away, but he still comes back sometimes to look for his things." The officers asked Lillian if she could contact the Hartwells, but both of their phones were still going straight to voicemail. Finally, around 10:30, Damien and Elena came home to find police cars in their driveway. Elena immediately rushed to Juniper and scooped her up in a hug. "What happened? Is everyone okay?" Detective Morrison explained the situation, and Elena's face went completely white. She looked at Damien and he looked equally shaken. "We need to talk to you privately," Detective Morrison said to the Hartwells. They went into the kitchen while Lillian stayed in the living room with Juniper. She couldn't hear everything they were saying, but she caught fragments. "Should have told the babysitter. Thought it had stopped. Need to consider moving again." When the police left, Elena came back into the living room and sat down next to Lillian. "I owe you an explanation," she said, "and an apology." Elena told Lillian that they'd bought the house from a bank foreclosure. The previous owner, a man named Victor Kowalski, had lived there alone for 15 years before losing the house due to unpaid taxes and debts. But Victor had refused to accept that the house was no longer his. "He's been arrested 3 times for trespassing," Elena explained. "He has keys to the house, we've changed the locks twice, but he somehow always gets new ones made. The police keep releasing him because he's never actually stolen anything or hurt anyone. He just comes back and goes through his old belongings that we haven't gotten rid of yet." Elena said they'd been hoping the problem would resolve itself, and it had been quiet for the past month, so they thought maybe Victor had finally moved on. "We should have told you," Elena said. "It wasn't fair to put you in that situation." Lillian asked why they hadn't just moved somewhere else, and Damien explained that they'd already moved twice in the past year because of his job, and they couldn't afford another relocation so soon. "We really thought it was over," he said. The Hartwells drove Lillian home and paid her for the full evening, plus extra for what she'd been through. They also said they understood if she never wanted to babysit for them again. But here's the thing that still bothers Lillian about that night. When Detective Morrison searched the house, she said all the doors and windows were locked from the inside. So how had Victor gotten in? And more importantly, how had he gotten out without Lillian seeing him? The police never found Victor that night, and as far as Lillian knows, they never figured out how he'd been getting into the house. The Hartwells ended up moving out 2 months later, and the house has been empty ever since. Lillian told me she drives by 847 Maple Grove Lane sometimes, and she swears she's seen lights on inside, even though the power was shut off when the Hartwells moved out. Alright guys, that's gonna wrap up today's video. I hope you enjoyed these stories, even though they probably gave you some serious chills. Before you go, make sure to hit that like button if you want to see more content like this, and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, I want to remind everyone to stay safe out there. If you ever find yourself in a situation like the ones we talked about today, don't hesitate to contact the police. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Sweet dreams.